Hello and welcome to this game review. So we already looked at this game, but still, perhaps something useful can come out of it. And mostly, it should be a reminder to always look at forcing moves, especially on the first move, for checks, captures, and attacks, as these are the moves that decide the games and the results. So we must focus on these moves. So we have the Sicilian, d4, and the knight f6, and here white plays this move bishop g5, but this is not a very good move as the bishop is not very well placed here. This pin can't really be used as white doesn't have time for e5, and now this pawn is weak, and after h6 unfortunately white has to give up the bishop pair, and here black is now better because he has the bishop pair. This dark squared bishop is very strong, and it's an unfortunate opening. The problem is that after this, g5 and the pawn on e4 is dropping. So instead, white should just put the knight on c3, and now black has a couple of ideas, mainly knight c6, and from here there are many ways to play. One of them, for example, is to just take and play e5. This is the main line. Otherwise, we can also play the move a3, which is an idea to stop bishop b4, which would be an annoying pin because of the e4 square. And now after, for example, bishop e7, we finish development, we castle kingside, and black has some problems with his light squared bishop. So after bishop g5, black gives this random check, but after c3, he just loses time. And now he could have just played bishop c5, but now this extra c3 move helps the knight. Now white breaks the opening principle of moving the same piece twice, and he plays knight f3, which is a very bad idea. Firstly, we don't want to move the same knight for the third time in the opening, because we are losing a lot of time. Also, here we had the opportunity to play e5 using this pin. So why did we make the pin if we're not going to use it? Still, black is not losing a piece. He can play h6, g5. But after knight e4, for example, knight d2, black's kingside is very weak. White has easy development, and soon he will start attacking this weak king. After knight f3, black even has some simple tactics, and it seems that the checks were not checked, and bishop takes f2 wins the game, because after king f2, this is a fork. Black will get the piece back, and he will have 2 pawns up. So bishop e7 instead, now knight b to d2. Now white finishes development. The bishop is not very well placed on c4, because black will play d5 anyway, but okay. Castles, castles, d5, and now we get this position with the isolated queen's pawn on d5. And the way to play these positions is firstly to blockade the square in front of the pawn, so that it does not move. Next, we want to exchange as many minor pieces as possible, and then we want to slowly go and win this pawn. So bishop e6, rook e1, a nice move to develop the rook. Queen d6, h3, maybe it's a useful move in some situations. h6, and here white could have taken here, and of course generally we don't really want to give up the bishop for the knight like this, but here there's a small tactic that we are getting the bishop back with knight e4. This pawn is pinned, so black has to go back, and we can take it. And now what's left on the board are 2 minor pieces each. This bishop is very passive, it must guard this pawn. This knight will go to d4 eventually. So white is doing very well. He achieved the goal of exchanging some minor pieces. Okay, bishop h4, and here again the same move applies. Okay, here bishop a4, and white is avoiding the exchange of bishop for knight, and again, usually we don't want to give up a bishop for a knight, but against the isolated queen's pawn, all the minor piece exchanges are beneficial. Okay, bishop a4, rook c1, a6, and knight b3, but this is a bit uncoordinated for white. The pieces don't look very nice here. This bishop is almost trapped. Instead, white could just improve his pieces in the center. Knight d4 makes sense. The knight can go to f3, maybe to e5. and now the threat is to take here, so white is slowly improving all of his pieces. But after knight b3, now this bishop is trapped, which means after knight c4, we can't really defend this pawn, because b5 would win the bishop. So knight goes back to d2. So this was a bit strange to go back and forth. This usually means that something went wrong, and black can just take the pawn. And now black is almost winning, because he has a pawn for nothing. Instead, he played b5. Now we can take, and black takes back with this pawn, which is a small positional mistake. If he had taken like this, then he would not have this isolated pawn anymore, and he would not have any weaknesses. And after bishop c2, for example, black is doing fine. He has some nice space here, and the position is equal. Instead, black took like this, and he left the easy target on d5, and he's also asking us to trade pieces. And should we trade pieces? Well, yes. Against the isolated queen's pawn, we want to trade minor pieces so that we could double or triple on the d file and then take this pawn. So now white plays b3, but this simply misses the threat of black of taking here. And since this pawn is here, we will have to take with the f pawn, which will weaken our king and also weaken the squares on the e file, as this pawn will never be able to make use and defend it. So instead, b3. Now black is doing kind of fine because he has weakened the white king. Takes, rook c8, and now a few moves later, the white gets a big opportunity, and in this position, and with 12 minutes on the clock, white did not check the checks, captures, and attacks. It turns out this pawn is simply hanging in one move, and every pawn we win is quite important, especially in such slow positions. Now the rook is also attacked, it will have to move, and white has this majority of 2 against 1, so eventually he will push his passed pawn. Until then, we can put the queen in the center, the bishop can go back, and the white's king is quite safe here around these pawns, and white obviously has the advantage. Instead, white didn't take it after a while, but again, the most important thing in chess is to take the opponent's pieces and not give up your own. So c4 takes, and now everything is exchanged. We get this kind of drawn rook endgame with mutual passed pawns, but the passed pawns were both traded, so 3 and 3 on one side should be an easy draw for both sides, but white played on, and a few moves later black made a mouse slip, not taking this pawn. Of course, he should take it, and there's nothing to play here. As 2 against 2, no one has passed pawns, so no one can really win this position. After this, g4, still even though objectively this should be a draw, white is of course playing for the win, because they have an extra pawn, a connected passed pawn on h5. So now black defended fairly well for a bit, and a few moves later, white again got some kind of advantage by playing h4. And here black should have taken. It's not very obvious, but after rook g3, it turns out white can't really make much progress, because this pawn has to be defended by the rook, and this king can't go up at any point, so black will just go back and forth with the king, and white can't really do much, as he doesn't have time to go take this pawn, as this one will drop. So instead, black goes here, but after this, now white has the connected passed pawns, though he does have to be a bit careful. He plays rook f5, but after this, surprisingly, this is again a draw, and quite an instructive draw, even though white has 2 connected passed pawns, which would usually win. At this point, white can't really make progress again, because his king is cut off on the 3rd rank. If this pawn is taken, then that is a draw. And if white tries to push, after king h6, now this pawn is attacked. And even though white can take this one, after rook g5, rook h4 for example, white again cannot make any progress. This king is blocking both of the pawns. This king is never going to get to f7. And white is stuck defending this pawn as well. So instead, rook h4, but now after g6, the pawns get going, king f3, rook g5. So this is kind of an interesting way to play it. It wasn't the only way to win, so white could also just bring the king and push g7, but rook g5 is interesting, and the black took this rook, as otherwise g7 is happening, or if here, then maybe just here. Though actually this does drop the pawn, still white would have to use his king. So instead, king g5, g7, and now white is winning, but he still would have to win this position with a queen against a rook and king. And it is winning, but it does require some technique if the opponent is good at defending. But in this game, he did not really defend too much, and a few moves later, he resigned. Of course, it is winning, but objectively, black would still kind of play on a little bit. For example, here, white would have to find a way to win the position. But overall, it's quite a decent game. The opening could have been better, as white got a lost position straight in the opening due to not playing by the opening principles and moving around the same knight for 3 times, which allowed a tactic on f2. So hopefully this was useful, and be sure to play more games so that you have new games to analyze every week.